In the summer of 1910, William James returned to the family home in Chocorua, New Hampshire, and died there at the age of 68. He had spent his last years traveling back and forth across the Atlantic despite serious heart disease, driven by a sense that he had not yet said what he most needed to say, that the philosophical project he had begun with pragmatism and extended through radical empiricism and the pluralistic universe was still incomplete, still pointing towards something he could not quite reach. The essays he produced in these final years, many of them published posthumously as essays in radical empiricism, represent an attempt to articulate a concept he called pure experience, the fundamental stuff of the universe, prior to the distinction between mind and matter that had generated philosophical confusion for centuries. Understanding this concept requires stepping back to see what problem it was designed to solve. Philosophy had long been haunted by the mind-body problem. How does the immaterial mind relate to the material body? How does consciousness relate to the physical brain? The dualist says they are two different kinds of thing that somehow interact. The materialist says the mind is just what the brain does. The idealist says the material world is really just mental. Each position, James thought, captured something real while distorting something else. None of them started from the right place. James's starting point was experience itself, not mind, not matter, but the raw, undifferentiated flow of occurring events that precedes the categories we impose upon it. Pure experience is what is there before we sort it into subjective and objective, mental and physical, knower and known. It is, in James's phrase, the that of experience, the sheer there-ness of what is happening, prior to any what that we assign to it. The same piece of experience, he argued, can be simultaneously part of a physical sequence, as a brain state, as a perception, as a causal element in the world, and part of a mental sequence, as a thought, a feeling, a memory. It is not two things. It is one thing playing two functional roles depending on how it is contextualized. This was a breathtakingly original position, and James was aware that he had not fully worked it out. He wrote to friends about his frustration at not having enough time. He knew his heart was deteriorating and he knew the project was incomplete. He left behind a body of essays rather than a finished book, notes rather than a polished argument. The unfinished quality of his last work is one of the things that makes it so poignant and so philosophically alive. You can feel a mind still at work, still discovering, still refusing to stop even when the body was insisting on its limits. The concept of pure experience was taken up and developed by subsequent philosophers, notably Alfred North Whitehead, whose process philosophy owes a substantial debt to James's late work, and by the Japanese philosopher Kotaro Nishida, who built an entire philosophical tradition on the idea of pure experience as his starting point. In the analytic philosophy of mind, James's notion anticipates what has been called neutromonism, the view that the fundamental constituents of reality are neither mental nor physical but something that can be described in either vocabulary depending on context. What the late James was reaching for, in the end, was a way of thinking about the relationship between consciousness and the world that honored both the reality of inner experience and the reality of the physical world without reducing one to the other. He wanted a philosophy that was genuinely empirical, that started from what we actually encounter rather than from theoretical abstractions, and that took consciousness seriously as a feature of reality, not an embarrassing anomaly to be explained away. He did not finish. But what he left behind is a set of philosophical explorations so rich and so honest that thinkers are still working out their implications more than a century later. The man who could not stop thinking, who raced against his failing heart to put more of it into words, left the world more than enough to think about. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his timeless ideas.